In the far western reaches of the Philippine archipelago lies a stretch of sea that has quietly become one of the most dangerous flashpoints of the 21st century. To the untrained eye, Ayungin Shoal appears insignificant, a partially submerged reef distant from population centers, battered by waves and storms. But beneath the surface, both literally and geopolitically, Ayungin Shoal represents something far greater. It is a test of international law, a test of sovereignty, and increasingly, a test of how far power can be pushed before restraint collapses. According to the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines' follow-up mission to deliver supplies to Filipino personnel stationed aboard the grounded naval vessel BRP Sierra Madre was successful. The operation, conducted under heightened tension, reaffirmed Manila's commitment to sustaining its presence at Ayungin Shoal, despite repeated attempts by China to block, harass, and intimidate Philippine forces. The routine rotation and resupply mission was executed through the combined efforts of the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. While described as routine, nothing about the mission was ordinary. Every kilometer of open water leading to Ayungin Shoal has effectively become contested space. The BRP Sierra Madre was never meant to become a symbol of resistance. Originally commissioned as a U.S. Navy landing ship during World War II, the vessel was transferred to the Philippines decades later. By the late 1990s, the ship was obsolete, aging, and nearing retirement. But in 1999, amid growing concerns about China's expanding presence in the Spratly Islands, the Philippine government made a calculated decision. The Sierra Madre was deliberately grounded on Ayungin Shoal. At the time, the move received little international attention. There were no dramatic press conferences, no military parades. But strategically, it was a decisive act. Under international law, a permanently stationed military presence, even aboard a grounded vessel, strengthens a state's claim to effective occupation. From that moment on, Ayungin Shoal became more than a reef. It became a frontline outpost. For over 2 decades, small contingents of Filipino Marines have lived aboard the decaying hull, enduring extreme heat, isolation, and constant surveillance by foreign vessels. Supplies arrive only through periodic rotation and resupply missions that have increasingly become targets of Chinese interference. On August 22nd, the Philippines was forced to conduct a follow-up resupply mission after an earlier attempt was partially disrupted. During that first mission, only one of 2 Philippine supply boats was able to reach the Sierra Madre. The second vessel was turned away after Chinese Coast Guard ships executed dangerous maneuvers and deployed high-pressure water cannons. Water cannons, while often described as non-lethal, are anything but harmless at sea. At close range, they can shatter windows, damage navigation equipment, injure crew members, and destabilize smaller vessels. Their use against unarmed resupply boats marked a deliberate escalation, carefully calibrated to intimidate without crossing the threshold of open armed conflict. Philippine officials described the Chinese actions as reckless and unlawful. Beijing described them as enforcement of Chinese law. Images circulating online showed a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating in the vicinity during the resupply operation. Almost immediately, speculation erupted. Was the United States directly supporting the Philippine mission? Was this a quiet escort operation? Had Washington crossed a new line? At a press conference, the Philippine Secretary of National Defense addressed the issue directly. The U.S. aircraft, he explained, was conducting its own freedom of navigation and surveillance operations. While such activities are regularly coordinated at a strategic level between allies, the resupply mission itself remained purely Philippine. This distinction was intentional. Manila wanted to send 2 messages at once. First, that it remains capable of conducting sovereign operations independently. Second, that it operates within a broader network of allied presence, one that China cannot ignore. China's objections to Philippine resupply missions have been consistent and uncompromising. Beijing claims that the Philippines is using these missions to smuggle construction materials intended to reinforce the Sierra Madre and permanently occupy Ayungin Shoal. Chinese officials insist that the ship was meant to be temporary, a claim Manila flatly rejects. In Chinese statements, Ayungin Shoal is referred to as Ren Ai Jiao, part of China's inherent territory. This assertion is rooted in the 9-dash line, a sweeping claim now found to have no standing under international law. In July 2016, a tribunal at The Hague ruled decisively in Manila's favor, finding China had no legal basis for its claims and had violated Philippine sovereign rights. China rejected the ruling entirely. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has taken a firmer stance, stating no promise was ever made to remove the Sierra Madre and that resupply missions are a legitimate exercise of Philippine authority. On August 5th, a mission was met with force as Chinese Coast Guard ships deployed water cannons against Philippine vessels. Analyst Ray Powell revealed China also deployed maritime militia from Mischief Reef, part of a state-directed force designed to blur the line between war and peace. Despite interference, the mission succeeded. The international community, led by the US, Australia, Japan, and Canada, condemned China's actions. Washington's statement was a clear signal, warning that an attack could trigger the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. This was followed by a historic US-Japan-South Korea summit at Camp David. The leaders jointly endorsed the 2016 arbitral ruling, a first for South Korea and a turning point in regional alliances, as noted by analyst Gregory Poling. India's position has gradually evolved over time. Once cautious in its public statements, New Delhi has increasingly emphasized freedom of navigation and respect for international law. In a recent joint statement with the Philippines, India referenced the 2016 arbitral ruling, signaling broader international attention to developments in the South China Sea. This reflects a wider shift. Issues surrounding the South China Sea are no longer viewed as purely regional. They now carry global significance, drawing interest from multiple countries concerned with maritime stability and lawful conduct. Despite ongoing diplomatic engagement and confidence-building efforts, tensions in the area remain. Analysts such as Gregory Poling have noted that repeated close encounters at sea increase the risk of accidents and unintended escalation. Even minor incidents, he warns, can carry serious consequences if mismanaged. In response, the Philippines and the United States have announced the resumption of joint maritime activities in the West Philippine Sea. These operations, previously suspended, are now intended to improve coordination, transparency, and readiness between allied forces. Defense officials from both countries have confirmed that these activities are defensive in nature and aimed at maintaining regional stability. China has expressed concerns regarding these developments. Philippine authorities, however, have emphasized that defense cooperation falls within their sovereign rights. Geography places the Philippines in a strategically important position, particularly near key sea lanes such as the Luzon Strait. This has led to increased focus on cooperation, interoperability, and shared maritime awareness among partners. Amid these developments, the BRP Sierra Madre remains stationed at Ayungin Shoal. Despite its age and condition, it continues to symbolize a long-standing presence and commitment. It reflects the idea that sovereignty can be expressed not only through force, but also through continuity and persistence. What is unfolding around Ayungin Shoal highlights broader questions about international law, maritime conduct, and regional cooperation. Observers often describe these activities as part of so-called gray zone operations, actions that remain below the level of open conflict while applying steady pressure through non-kinetic means. Such approaches rely on Coast Guard vessels, civilian maritime ships, and non-lethal measures to influence behavior without direct confrontation. At Ayungin Shoal, these dynamics are clearly visible. China's maritime militia is one of the least understood, yet most effective, tools in its arsenal. These vessels often appear to be fishing boats, but they are built stronger, equipped with advanced communications gear, and trained to operate in coordination with the People's Liberation Army Navy and the China Coast Guard. They swarm disputed areas. They block access routes. They shadow foreign ships relentlessly. Because they are not officially naval vessels, any confrontation involving them becomes legally ambiguous. If a Philippine ship collides with a militia vessel, who is at fault? If force is used, does it count as military escalation? This ambiguity is intentional. Former U.S. defense officials have repeatedly warned that China's maritime militia is not a spontaneous civilian movement. It is organized, funded, trained, and directed by the state. At Ayungin Shoal, militia ships often arrive first, probing, testing, positioning, before Coast Guard vessels move in to apply pressure. To understand China's persistence, one must understand geography. Ayungin Shoal lies near Mischief Reef, a once submerged feature that China transformed into a massive artificial island, complete with airstrips, radar installations, and hardened shelters. Mischief Reef is now one of Beijing's most important military outposts in the Spratly Islands. But under international law, Mischief Reef lies within the Philippines' EEZ. China's control over Ayungin Shoal would tighten its grip on the surrounding waters, creating overlapping zones of influence that could eventually turn the central South China Sea into a de facto Chinese-controlled lake. From Beijing's perspective, allowing the Philippines to maintain a permanent outpost at Ayungin Shoal undermines that objective. The Sierra Madre is not just an eyesore, it is an obstacle. For the Filipino Marines stationed aboard the BRP Sierra Madre, geopolitics is not an abstraction. It is daily reality. The ship's interior is dark, cramped, and corroded. Rainwater seeps through rusted plates. Temperatures inside can be brutal. Supplies are limited. Medical evacuation is difficult. And beyond the hull, Chinese ships are almost always present. The Marines live under constant observation. Binoculars trained on them, drones overhead, radios crackling with warnings from nearby Coast Guard ships. Yet rotations continue. Each resupply mission is not only logistical, but psychological. It tells the troops, you are not forgotten. And it tells the world, the Philippines is still here. China often argues that facts on the water matter more than legal rulings. But the Philippines is fighting on two fronts. On the water, it maintains physical presence. On paper, it maintains legal legitimacy. The 2016 arbitral ruling remains the strongest legal weapon Manila possesses. Although China ignores it, the ruling shapes international opinion, alliance behavior, and diplomatic language. Every time another country references the ruling, China's position weakens, not militarily, but politically. This is why Beijing reacts so strongly when nations like South Korea or India mention the decision. It is not just law, it is narrative. Washington walks a careful line. The United States has no territorial claims in the South China Sea, but it has interests. Freedom of navigation, alliance credibility, and regional stability. By reaffirming that the Mutual Defense Treaty applies to Philippine public vessels, including the Coast Guard, Washington has raised the stakes. But it has stopped short of direct escort missions. This is intentional. Too much involvement risks escalation. Too little risks emboldening Beijing. The presence of U.S. surveillance aircraft, joint patrols, and rotational deployments sends a message without firing a shot. One of the most significant shifts in recent years is the recognition that Coast Guard vessels are now frontline assets. China understands this. That is why it has built the world's largest Coast Guard fleet, larger than most navies. By confronting Philippine Coast Guard ships instead of naval vessels, China keeps incidents below the level of war while still applying state power. The United States' explicit inclusion of Coast Guard vessels under the Mutual Defense Treaty was therefore a major development. It closed a dangerous loophole. Not all voices within the Philippines are unified. Some argue that maintaining the Sierra Madre is too risky, that Manila should seek accommodation to avoid conflict. Others argue the opposite, that backing down would invite further pressure, not peace. President Marcos Jr.'s stance suggests that his administration has chosen resolve over retreat. But this decision carries costs. China is a major trading partner. Economic pressure is always a possibility. Tourism, exports, and investments can all be influenced. This makes Manila's position all the more significant. The United States has imposed sanctions on Chinese companies involved in island building and militarization. Diplomats have issued statements, navies have sailed. Yet China's behavior has remained largely unchanged. Why? Because Beijing calculates that the long-term strategic value of the South China Sea outweighs short-term diplomatic costs. This is a contest of patience. Experts consistently warn that the greatest risk is not deliberate war, but accident. A collision at sea, a crew member injured by a water cannon, a ship capsized in rough waters. In such an environment, even a small incident could spiral. Gregory Polling's warning echoes across defense circles. China will eventually go too far. And when that happens, leaders on all sides will have minutes, not days, to decide how to respond. The resumption of U.S.-Philippine joint patrols sends a message not only to China, but to other regional states. It says that alliances are active, it says commitments are real, and it says that the West Philippine Sea is not abandoned space. Joint sail operations also improve interoperability. Shared communications, shared procedures, shared understanding. In a crisis, these details matter. The Philippines' northern geography places it along what strategists call the first island chain, a line of islands stretching from Japan through Taiwan to the Philippines. Control of this chain affects access to the Pacific. China's interest in Philippine bases and its opposition to U.S. access agreements cannot be separated from Taiwan. Everything is connected. Several paths lie ahead. China could continue gray zone pressure indefinitely, betting that fatigue will set in. The Philippines could reinforce the Sierra Madre more openly, daring China to respond. Allies could increase patrols and presence, raising deterrence and risk. Or one day something could go wrong. As waves crash against the corroded hull of the BRP Sierra Madre, the ship remains, not because it is strong, but because it is stubborn. In an age of satellites, missiles, and cyber warfare, a rusting ship manned by a handful of Marines has become one of the most important symbols in the Indo-Pacific. It is a reminder that power is not always about dominance. Sometimes it is about staying. This is West Pacific Watch.